Hello, and welcome to the How to Be an Author podcast. I'm writing coach Karena Akhavein, and this is the sort of episode I really like because it kind of turns some things that you thought you knew about writing on their head. I love to sometimes look at things from a different point of view because many times when writing clients come to me, they are at the end of their ropes. They've been doing some things in their writing career that's not really been working for them. So it's part of my job to find different ways of approaching this writing thing so that you can encounter that success that you've been dreaming of. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about the art of the satisfying, maybe unpredictable, appropriate, fun, exciting ending for your book, but also for your writing career. And this is something that I think is so important. Many times you start something off and you're expecting one thing, and then you get that ending that's got a twist. And half the times you're like, that was a great twist. And then half of the times you're like, oh my gosh, this ruins everything I thought about what I just read or what I just watched or what I just went through. And this is something that we really have to address as writers because you are crafting the ending of your book. You're also capable of crafting what comes next in your writing career, but too many of us leave that to chance. Now, there is something to be said for the pantsters who kind of like to see what happens with the story, but sometimes that's not the best way to do that. But some of us like that. Some of us like that unpredictableness. So that's why I want to kind of look at both sides of this issue of, letting things happen and flow or actually planning ahead. Both are fine. Both have their pros and cons. So I want to talk about that in this episode of the podcast. But really, this episode is all about giving you great advice on crafting endings for your book, but also using your ending to make the whole writing process easier, leaving your readers much more satisfied and leaving you not going so crazy with everything being difficult and being blocked. Also, in the mindset and productivity section, we're going to be talking about the work that I did with a few different authors, many of whom really worried about how and when they were ever going to finish their book. They were pretty much stuck with a crappy mindset because they're like, I'm never going to see the end of this. And you will. But I've got some mindset hacks, really powerful ones for actually doing much better with that whole delayed gratification thing that sometimes comes along with writing. It doesn't always have to, but it is definitely a thing. Writing a book and publishing a book and, even moving forward and promoting a book, all of these are long games. And I know that that can mess with our little immediate instant gratification starved minds. So I'm going to be talking about the mindset of, ending, finishing, and what comes next. And also business-wise, I'm going to talk about the end game in your author career and how to reverse engineer a successful writing career by looking at your ideal ending first. Kind of fun stuff. And I think it can be really powerful when it comes to, what you focus on. As writers, we're used to writing, and then we realize that we're supposed to be business people. And this can be really kind of scary and horrible when you look at it, but you don't have to be overwhelmed by it. And by plotting something, a plan, looking at the end first, we can definitely have less silly work that we do that doesn't really help out in the long run. So buckle up, get yourself a cup of coffee or tea, have a seat or settle down behind the wheel. We are going to be talking about really great endings in your book and in your writing career. If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karena Akhavein, on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation. I'm so happy you're here for this episode of the How to Be an Author podcast. Some of you are struggling through NaNoWriMo right now. The end is in sight, though. You're kind of halfway through the month, and you might be panicking because the ending of a book is crucial. It leaves a lasting impression on readers. It shapes their overall experience. And as a writing coach, I don't just guide you through the beginnings and the middle. I try to make sure that we have a well-crafted ending that provides resolution, emotional impact, and makes the story memorable and satisfying. A satisfying ending is really the thing that is going to leave that lasting impression for your reader. And that's really important because many times I've talked about book marketing where, once you have a reader that likes what you've written, they're more likely to read your next book. And that's how careers build on themselves, because people are just waiting for what's coming next. However, if you mess up the ending, that might not happen. So remember, some authors I know, they'll do anything they can. They'll throw everything at the ending and they want that crowd pleaser. And I get that, but remember that your ending has to stay true to the essence of your story. You can't just craft this Hollywood ending because you think it's going to make your reader happy when it doesn't suit your story. So let's talk about a few of the key steps that I walked through with one of my writers, Bettina, who had a great beginning and then she started petering out towards the ending. She was already kind of, in a late point of writing her book, which was unfortunate in a way, because sometimes when I start working with an author early, I can let them in on one of my massive hacks, which is write your ending early. This is such a huge writing hack for me. And I know that for some writers, you're like, perish the thought. No way. I like to be a pantser. I like to just let the story write itself and the ending will just kind of organically happen. And that's a thing that works. That's fine. You can do that. But when you're stuck and that's not been working for you, I recommend thinking of what the ending is early on, because it's so much easier to connect the dots when you know what your ending is. I've done this both ways, and I know that personally for myself, I vastly prefer knowing what the ending is. And actually, this is why sometimes when I'm writing romance, I'm kind of pleased because I know that the writing is going to lead us to the couple being together. That's just what romance is. And so I know that. And then I have to think to myself to reverse engineer. I go, okay, well, they had all these obstacles. What needs to happen for them to finally end up together, since we know they do? And that helps me to connect the dots in my plot. Now, not all books are romance. Not all books have happy endings. Some books have surprising endings. So first of all, you need to know your genre and you need to know your theme. Consider the expectations of your genre while you're crafting an ending. Because if you're writing a romance novel and the couple doesn't end up together at the end, you're going to lose so many of your readers, because this is what they expect. You don't go watch a Hallmark movie hoping that everybody's going to die at the end. No, absolutely not. The character is going to come home for Christmas and there's going to be some making out under the Christmas tree. So make sure the ending aligns with the genre and the theme and message of your story. So if your story is all about redemption and your character all of a sudden turns around and, is worse than they were at the beginning, all of a sudden your readers are going to say, what is going on, right? So think of endings as well as driven by your characters and by the character arcs that you have in your story. You need to resolve character arcs in a satisfying and believable manner, showing growth and change. This is what makes it satisfying. This is the difference between a book and real life, is that characters are so much better in books. Books are so much better than real life because things actually improve or change or grow. And so really think about, what does my character need to go through? And if, for example, your ending is your character being class president and super popular and all of that, and the beginning is your character being really shy and not having any friends, well, how are we going to create the character arc that takes you from that point to the other point? There have to be some things that happen, some growth and some change for the character. So that's really, really important as well. With Bettina, she didn't really know. She had a character who was in a certain situation, and she really could not see how her character was going to get out of that situation, which I kind of think is great in a way. She was desperate about it, but she's like, yeah, I really don't see how she can get out of this. And I was like, well, that's what obstacles are. That is literally the definition of obstacles, and that's great. We just need to figure out ways around it. And those are the only dots that you're going to need to connect. So she felt a lot better about that, knowing that, oh, okay, this is what a plot is. This is what character arcs are. This is what a story arc is. So that's kind of great. When you're going for your ending, you definitely, as I said, want to be connecting that ending to the characters. I really don't like it so much when an ending kind of wraps things together in a bow with a bunch of different characters, but kind of like if it was a movie, imagine it pulling away, kind of panning out too much from the beginning. A little caveat to that, but I really want us to first drill down and see how the ending is really going to give emotional resonance to your story, connect the readers to those characters one last time so that they're like, wow, that's amazing for them. And then you can have that camera pan out so that you see that emotional aspect, how the ending happened for your characters may have some results in the broader world of your story at large. That is super cool to do. And that's a method. So think about one of my other little tricks when you are looking at endings. I had Bettina do this because she was kind of burnt out. So she was super happy that she got to sit down for a weekend and watch the movies. But I said, look at the movies and write down how the endings are working. How is that happening? Which endings feel better? What are the cinematography tricks that are used so that there's almost this signal that the ending is coming? How do you do that? Well, first of all, you've been building tension leading up to a climax, right? The climax of your story is that high point in the story where after that, you kind of have this anticipation that there's going to be a resolution. So think of this in terms of a movie, tensions are high. In a book, it's the same way. So you definitely want to think about, okay, I'm building up, building up, building out. And then we've got falling action to the final ending, the final resolution of the story. The resolution of your story is not going to be action filled. It is going to be something a little bit more reflective because you need the time for the emotional resonance. So somebody had asked me about this the other day and they're like, oh, okay, so I have all this excitement. Like, how do I end it? And I said, yeah, you can't end on the excitement. You need to have a little bit of space for reflection for a satisfying ending. So very interesting the way that that works in terms of pacing and in terms of, the tension of your book. Now, another thing that makes a ending so much more satisfying is having foreshadowing. And this is another reason why I think it's great to know what your ending is early on, because then you can be writing those subtle hints or that foreshadowing throughout the story so that the ending feels organic and like it was, kind of written in the stars that it would happen this way. And oftentimes when you have foreshadowing and stuff like that, it can align with your theme. Again, this can be imagery. I've spoken in other episodes about how your theme, you don't clobber somebody over the head with it. You come up with motifs that are these images that represent the theme. This can be part of your foreshadowing. And you can so much more easily add the tension and foreshadowing that when you know what your ending is going to be. So that's pretty crucial. Now, Bettina was like, oh, great, thanks a lot. I'm late in the process. I didn't have a chance to write this foreshadowing in, and I didn't have a chance to do this pacing. You've got to know it is easier than you think to go back and write that back in. This is what editing is about. Editing is not just about punctuation and, spelling mistakes. Editing is sometimes about fixing the pacing, the foreshadowing, and everything else in your story. And this can be done with just a few sentences, just a few tweaks. You don't need to have a million different ways of doing this. It doesn't mean rewriting your whole book. So that's very important to know. I think that might make you feel better, but super important to realize that when you plan the ending first, yes, it can help. But if you didn't plan the ending first, and if you let it go organically, and we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of that, you can definitely go back and edit that back in. Another thing that you can edit back in is that you should probably test the waters, like share your ending with beta readers, get feedback, make sure it resonates. And if it doesn't, it's not that hard to write a different ending. Better to know now before you hit publish that your ending was kind of cliche, or that your ending was predictable, or that your ending was disappointing, right? So definitely check with a few readers who are going to tell you whether your ending is hitting the right notes. I think that that's really crucial for you to think about doing. Now, one last important thing to do. Bettina was struggling because she had a couple subplots in her book, which was part of the issue because many times with beginning writers, when you've got too many subplots, you don't know how to wrap them up. That's really stressful for newer writers sometimes. And I always say, keep it simple and add the subplot maybe at the end when you're editing. But she had these subplots, and I said, okay, it's important for you to know that you have to tie up loose ends and resolve any subplots you have before you hit the ending or when you hit the ending. So a subplot's only useful when it's part of the greater story, right? You don't want a subplot that's completely separate to the story. So to have a comprehensive conclusion, you need to tie up loose ends and resolve any subplots as well. So as promised, let's talk about the pros and cons of planning your ending first versus leaving the ending to chance. Because I know there are two major schools of thought when it comes to this, and I'm probably not going to convince the inveterate pantser to do it another way, and I'm probably not going to convince a planner to do it another way. And you know already that my preference is thinking about the ending a little bit, at least at the beginning. But let's talk about some pros and cons. If you're planning the ending first, you're going to have a little bit more coherence. The ending's going to align better with the overall story structure. It's going to give you a clear roadmap. And I always say, put success in your GPS, have the address of where you're going. This is going to prevent aimless storytelling, where you're writing around in circles and you don't know where your story's going. This happens a lot with pantser stuff when they're writing in circles and they have all these little side stories and it makes no sense. Forget it. The aforementioned foreshadowing, when you're doing this throughout the story, is better integrated. Of course, you can end up putting the foreshadowing in later. So yeah, I would say that the biggest pro in planning the ending first is the sheer efficiency of it. It really is a more efficient writing process. You've got this predetermined destination and you can really connect the dots and you're not wasting any time. But some authors like quote, wasting time, right? So some of the cons of planning your ending first, you might think that this limits creative spontaneity and exploration. I get it. That is totally your prerogative. If you want to be spontaneous and you want to kind of go for a little walk, meandering, that's great because that's your choice as an author. That's what is so awesome about being an author. You have both ways of doing things. Now, sometimes I tend to think about things in the optics of being a commercially successful author, one who's going to be able to publish more books. You know, each year you're going to be able to have at least one book come out and you're going to be able to build on your writing career, but that's not what everyone wants. Some people want to write the beautiful book of their dreams, and you're going to be thinking, you know what? Maybe a great ending is going to present itself that I wouldn't have thought of, and that's fair enough. You might feel that your ending is too predictable if you follow this planned trajectory too closely, if you follow the outline that I'm always encouraging you to do too closely. I get it. You don't want to miss those opportunities that might arise during the writing process. And also sometimes, and this is so true and so fun, characters might evolve in unexpected ways during writing, and a predetermined ending might not suit their developing. Totally fair. But this is why when we're talking about planning the ending first, it doesn't have to be written in stone, which haha is the title of one of my books. It doesn't have to be. You can have an ending planned, and then if a character says something that all of a sudden you go, wait, this is too good for me to drop, this is too good for me not to explore, you can then add that into the ending. But now it's just a question of tweaking instead of a question of going completely back to the drawing board. And newsflash, even if you go completely back to the drawing board for your ending, it's fine. You're allowed to do that. But I think that sometimes for those of us who are stuck, knowing where we're going is fine. And then you change directions or you decide to go a different way or take the scenic route. That's fine too. And again, a combination is fine as well. You can get off the highway and go explore that pretty road because the autumn leaves are showing. That's wonderful. Do that. But I want you to feel that you have the freedom to do things, right? And, you know, you want to have these surprising twists and you want to have the character authenticity. All of that is really great. It's good to have flexibility, but it's also good to have coherence, have, that clear endpoint that can blast you through the writer's block, that can help you to resolve your narrative when you're having a big challenge with that. And, sometimes you're going to have to, when you've been writing around in circles, your editing process is going to take longer. I've been in the process of editing something where, my plot kind of ran away with me. I have to admit, I sometimes don't take my own advice. And I promise I had an outline when I started, but some things happened where some subplots became more important. And let me tell you, that editing's been taking so much more time to do. And that's just my own editing. Let's just wait until my editor gets to me. So without a planned ending, you might lose purpose and it might take longer to write your book. And this is really important because we are now going to be doing a little segue into the mindset part of this podcast. And that whole idea of a book meandering and losing purpose and taking longer to get there, this can affect your mindset. So my author number 2, Richard, was worried about how and when he was going to finish his book. And I ended up giving him a very powerful mindset hack that I think he really needed. I'm going to be sharing that with you today. And also keep in mind that if you're getting a lot of information thrown at you in this episode, you could be taking notes and that's awesome. But also know that I have this wonderful workbook, which is DIY Author, where you have so many reference sheets and worksheets that go over all of this stuff and so much more. Every single one of my powerful writing hacks, whether they're for mindset, business, or crafting a book, they are all in there, and it's kind of awesome. And if you need handholding, if you want your writing coach, in video, in your ear, all of that, also walking you through the process, and you want to be on a timeline. If you've started NaNoWriMo and you're like, I'm ready for the next challenge, where do I go from now? My masterclass from idea to published in 6 months is the best investment of your money and your time that you could possibly make. And it's also a really great deal. It is going to help you to not make all these mistakes that can be expensive in terms of money spent on your career, time spent on your career, and frustration. Frustration costs you. Writing a book is not easy. There are a lot of steps involved. Getting to a point where you feel successful in this writing career, it can take so much longer than expected. It can. The whole publishing issue, the whole process is longer than you think. And we're all into instant gratification. And sometimes writing doesn't really give you that, which is why here's a little front-loaded early hack that I gave Richard when he was getting super frustrated. I said, listen, why don't you, instead of, he was doing a lot of writing prompts because he loved doing writing prompts. And it made him feel better when he was stuck because the process was taking so long. I said, why don't you take some of these? Some of these are great. Why don't you do flash fiction contests? Why don't you do short stories? Write poetry? Do these things where you feel that, okay, I'm actually creating work that I can get out there so much faster. This also could help you to build a platform of readers. And that's really major as well. So start getting your stuff out there. Publishing is publishing, whether it's flash fiction, poetry, or even a podcast or a blog post. So think about that in terms of the instant gratification side of your writing. I think that's important. But also what's important is many times you wonder, okay, how am I going to get there? It's taking such a long time. This is so frustrating. It is so uncomfortable. There is a mindset shift. And when I just tell you to embrace the idea that writing's a process and that each step is really important and, you're going towards overall growth and improvement, I know that doesn't feel great because it's really hard to just be told, shift your mindset. It's something that has to happen organically. But sometimes the more you hear something and the more you see other writers who are going through it, the more you start to actually instinctively and organically understand it. So let me tell you a little story. I had this kind of woo-woo numerologist energy person that a friend of mine hired for me as a gift, which, I just think this is fun because I always think, oh, they might tell me something cool or something horrible, or at the very least, it could make a really good story. And I love collecting good stories. So I do these experiences that I think, okay, I can use this in a book, or, it's just going to be something creatively interesting to me. So this numerologist energy person was like, oh, you are going to finally hit your stride in your career when you're 54. And I was like, oh my God, that's awesome. That really excited me. And that was years off, especially at the time. It's still a couple of years off. And I told people around me, I was like, oh my God, isn't this cool? And they were horrified. They were horrified. Again, instant gratification. They're like, are you kidding me? You're going to be working like this for the next X number of years. And, it's only going to hit you're only going to hit your stride at that age. Guess what? At least I'm going to hit my stride. This is a long game. You've got to come to terms with it, right? We all know intellectually that it is, but you really have to come to terms with it fundamentally, right? So there are these different ways of looking at it. And I know it's going to take time, but I said that mindset shift is really crucial. You've got to set some realistic expectations that writing a book takes time. Setting these expectations are going to help you to manage frustration and anxiety. And this is why when I created my course from idea to publish in 6 months, some people are like, oh my God, 6 months, that's so long. Some people are like, 6 months, that's so short, right? People have different feelings of how much time it takes to do something. You know how long it took me to actually create that course? It took me 2 years because I wanted to make sure that this was a timeline that was ambitious but possible. And also, I let people know when they take the course that you can tweak this timeline as you see fit and extend it. I don't see you compressing it that much unless you're really doing some crazy things to be doing this 100% of the time. And let me give you a little warning of what I was doing. I was editing this book I'm talking about. And this was just this past weekend. I had thought that I would get a chance to finish editing the book, send it off to my editor. And I was like, okay, let's get this done. I want to bring out the audiobook at the same time as the book when I let it out. That's not realistic, I soon found. And I was working 12-hour days trying to work on this book. And let me tell you something, that's too much. I was not able to sleep. I was burnt out. I was really losing perspective in a big way. And I had to force myself to push the pause button and take a day for myself. So definitely make sure to protect your mental health when you're working on a book. And part of this is really celebrating the small wins. So many authors beat themselves up. They see one single ending for their writing story. And that single ending is, I'm going to finish my book. And I'm going to tell you why that's a huge mistake in a second. You can't just have that one goal. You need to have smaller achievements along the way that you can celebrate, whether it's completing a chapter, reaching a word count goal, overcoming a specific writing challenge, writing a difficult scene. All of these are things that you should celebrate. Because believe me, if you don't celebrate the small wins, the wins are few and far between if you're not looking at the little things, right? That high that comes from finishing and publishing a book happens once every 6 months, once every year, once every 2 years. That's not a lot of wins to be celebrating. And that's just one big difficult thing. So instead of fixating on that one end goal, you've got to find ways to appreciate the journey. Each writing session contributes to the evolution of your work. Each post you make on social media contributes to your author platform. Break it all down. Make it manageable. Get a sense of progress. It's so important. And again, as I said, connecting with fellow writers is really going to help you to be a little bit more objective about this. And as I said, you've got to take the breaks. And it's really funny because I'm a little bit of a workaholic and I say take breaks, yet I don't apply that to myself until all of a sudden I hit a wall like I did this weekend. That was so dangerous. I really saw how I was a little bit Icarus-like, right? I was flying a little too close to the sun on that one. That's crazy. I found myself, and when you can't sleep and when you can't think of anything else, realize that that is not the place where you want to be. Not cool. And also set aside perfectionism. Like your first draft doesn't need to be perfect. And you've got some more steps. And this is what's really, really important. Seeking support is crucial because it helps to get that objectivity that we lose when we are right in the middle of it, when we're in the trenches. That's so important. So let's talk about this mindset hack. I don't want you to look at finishing your book as the end point. That's a huge mistake. So, as I've said before, smaller points along the way But I actually want you to plan for failure. There's somebody who's really good at, all kinds of money things and mindset things, whose name is Ramit Sethi. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he had this podcast episode or maybe an article once where he said, plan for failure. And I was like, wow, that's really negative. Why are you saying that? But he's right. Plan for the failure, your first failure that's going to come after finishing your book, right? Whether that failure is having an editor tell you that it's crap and it needs to be revised, whether that failure is not getting accepted by, any agents, whether that failure is publishing it and, crickets, you don't sell any copies. Okay, plan for that failure. And that might sound incredibly negative, but it's not, because we as human beings in general try to be optimistic people. And once you plan for that failure, you're automatically going to start planning for what to do after that, right? You're going to try to plan for resolution afterwards automatically, right? But if you never plan for the bad part, you're never going to have the plan for what to do if it doesn't go according to plan. And also remember, people are like, well, why should I plan for failure? Why should I put these things in place? Because what if I just succeed? Okay, that's great. Has anyone ever been upset that things turned out better than they'd hoped? I don't think so. So definitely I would say set your plan a little bit further in the future. And that idea, my friends, takes us to the final part of the podcast, which is about reverse engineering a successful writing career by looking at our ideal endpoint. And I'm not talking about, you're 95 and you're almost dead and you've been writing for 70 years. No, don't look at that. Like, let's be positive. But I was talking with one of my clients who was having a really hard time looking at their long-term goals because they were so focused on finishing their book, right? And so this is my client, Colette, and she has this great book that she's been writing, but she's been really, again, focusing on the end of that one book. And I said, it's more important when you're trying to build an author platform, when you're trying to have a publishing strategy, when you're trying to build on your previous successes, you really want to engineer this. You can't be a pantser when it comes to your writing career. I mean, you can, but it's going to take longer because you don't have those goals that are clearly set, right? So clearly define your long-term goals. And when I'm talking about that, so Colette's like, great, I want to make a lot of money from my writing career. Okay, that's awesome. That's good. That's one of the goals, right? How are you going to do that? That's harder, right? If that's one of your goals, do be clear about it, because the author who wants to make a lot of money from your career is a different animal than the author who just wants to write for themselves and have a couple readers and impact a couple people's lives, right? Impact is important. What kind of impact do you want your work to have? Do you want your work to be more niche? Do you want it to be more popular? Do you want it to be a bestseller? Do you want it to be something that younger people read, older people read? Do you want it to be a book club book? All of these things can be reverse engineered, right? So where do you see yourself in the future? What's your genre? Who's your audience? This knowledge that you have about the type of audience that you want to foster, how are you going to do that, right? This is going to influence not only your writing style, because you're speaking to your audience, but also your marketing strategies. Where are you going to find that audience? How are you going to surprise and delight them to welcome them into your author platform? And believe me, my course and my workbook absolutely have things on determining who your ideal audience is and making those plans. You really should check those out. It is so powerful when you know who your audience is. It impacts your marketing strategies. Sometimes you even don't notice you're doing it because that knowledge is so powerful. So definitely think about when you're building that author brand, and do consider circling back and checking out my podcast on the author brand. It's in the voice podcast, Using Your Voice. Definitely consider, how do you want to be perceived by readers and by the literary community? This includes your author persona, your online presence, and the theme of your work, and keeping your work consistent or not. Right? So some authors are exploring all these different genres and they don't really have consistency. That's a thing. That's a choice, right? But if you want a brand, consistency is key. So this is where you consider having different pen names, right? And remember that having a bunch of different books that you're publishing under different pen names means that you might not be publishing as quickly. You might be building each brand more slowly. It's a choice, right? So definitely think about that. That's part of your endpoint plan. Do I want multiple author brands, a single author brand? What is it? All of that, right? There's also, when you're looking at the long term and you're looking at the ending, think about, okay, here's the end that I want, right? Which people are going to help me along the way? Which people do I need to build relationships with? Are these people agents? Are they Hollywood? Are they fellow writers? Are they readers that I meet one-on-one? Depending on what your end point is, you're going to be spending more time and energy cultivating connections with different professionals in the publishing industry. And if you're interested in this whole issue, I did an episode on making the best of a writing conference. And I think that that's definitely a useful listen because, many of us are introverts and we think, how am I supposed to cultivate connections? It's also easier than you think, right? Another thing to think about is, okay, is my end goal making money and, living from being a writer? If so, you're going to have to think about, how do I diversify my income streams? I need to explore opportunities beyond just book sales, but definitely that are attached to my identity as a writer. So can I be doing speaking engagements, teaching, freelance writing, collaborations, all of these things? We're always growing, learning, and changing, right? We have to stay updated. So remember that you're going to be looking at the ending that you want. Sometimes the ways of getting to that ending are changing and evolving, and you need to evolve with it. That's, creating little edits to your author plan, just like you would to your book once you've decided on the ending. That really helps to not be fixed in something that might not work for the character development that you're having, either for your main character or yourself, right? That's really important. I mean, when I started off, I had no idea that this thing called TikTok would actually impact book sales so much, would actually build community so much. And that was something that I had to learn to embrace. It is very much part of my plan and my end game, knowing that TikTok is being banned in certain states. TikTok is not, it might not exist a few years from now. It's going to be something new, but my plan really rests in making sure to capitalize on what it's doing right now and finding the new ways of promoting my books in my community as I go, right? Always learning and changing. And always, marketing strategy is something that you do an overall strategy for each, for your writing career, and then you do a strategy for each book, and these need to fit inside, but it's all part of that end point, right? You have to be adaptable. But having this idea, having a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, or an end of career plan, this really helps you. Again, just like the writing, it helps you to connect the dots and strategically plan each step to align with your ultimate goal. Success in writing, it's a combo of talent, perseverance, and strategy. It's not just creative. As I always say, it is business. And if this is something that terrifies you, I really encourage you to talk to me, your writing coach, because these things are possible to learn. I just want you to know that I hated that idea as much as you might when I first started out, and now it's kind of second nature. So definitely that's something that you will embrace the change. You will see if you take my course from idea to publish in 6 months, you are going to see that the person you are at the end of that course is completely different in a good way from the person you were as a writer at the beginning of the course, because you're going to be just kind of organically adapting, and your mindset's going to change and your business acumen's going to change. And at the end, you're going to be so much closer to being the author that you wanted to be than you were at the beginning. So I think that's kind of a magical thing. So that's it. I hope that today's episode really kind of turned your thinking on its head a little bit, helped you to see the possibilities for streamlining your writing career, for making the writing process easier, for breaking through blocks, for being the author you want to be faster, easier, maybe, maybe more directly. And I think it's a different way of looking at things. And if this is not the way you write or you work, and if the way that you write and you work is working for you, I never want you to feel bad about any of the advice or any of the ideas in this. This is just suggestions for people who've been working hard and it's not been working until then. So if you have anything else that you'd like to know or anything else you'd like me to touch on, please feel free to reach out. Go to my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com or onlineCoursesForWriters.com, and you can email me directly. I answer every email. I really welcome them from all of you. It's so special to me. And I look forward to being with you next time on the How to Be an Author podcast. If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.